What if I told you that everything you think you know about human behavior is completely backwards? What if the people around you, your colleagues, your friends, even your family members, are operating according to hidden psychological rules that they themselves don't even understand? Here's the truth that most people will never discover. Humans are not logical creatures. We like to think we are. We tell ourselves that we make rational decisions based on facts and evidence. But neuroscience has revealed something shocking. The human brain makes decisions first, then creates logical justifications afterwards to make us feel smart about choices we've already made unconsciously. This means that every single day, you are surrounded by people who are being controlled by invisible psychological forces. And if you don't understand these forces, you're being controlled by them too. You're reacting instead of responding. You're being influenced instead of influencing. You're playing a game where everyone else knows the rules except you. But what if you could flip the script? What if you could see the psychological patterns that govern human behavior before others even know they exist? What if you could predict what people will do, understand why they do it, and influence their decisions in ways that feel completely natural to them? The most successful leaders, negotiators, entrepreneurs, and influential people in the world, they understand human psychology at a level that gives them an almost supernatural ability to read, predict, and guide human behavior. They're strategic. They see the game that's being played while others don't even realize there's a game happening. This audiobook will give you that same advantage. By the time you finish listening, you will never look at human interactions the same way again. You'll see the psychological triggers that most people miss. You'll understand the subconscious patterns that drive every decision. And you'll have the tools to ethically influence any situation in your favor. But here's what you need to understand. This information is not for everyone. Most people prefer to remain unconscious, to let their emotions and impulses drive their behavior. They're comfortable being predictable, being influenced, being led. If you're ready to step into a higher level of awareness, if you're ready to understand the hidden psychology that controls human behavior, then let's begin. Because once you see these patterns, you can never unsee them. Chapter 1. The illusion of rational behavior. The biggest lie we tell ourselves is that we are rational beings who make logical decisions. This lie is so deeply embedded in our self-perception that we defend it aggressively, even when presented with overwhelming evidence to the contrary. But here's what neuroscientists have discovered that will shatter this illusion forever. Using brain imaging technology, researchers can now see exactly how decisions are made in the human brain. And what they found is revolutionary. The emotional centers of your brain, particularly the limbic system, make decisions up to 7 seconds before your conscious mind even becomes aware that a decision needs to be made. 7 seconds. That means the part of you that thinks it's in control, your rational conscious mind, is actually just along for the ride, creating stories to justify decisions that were already made by your unconscious emotional brain. Think about the last major decision you made. Maybe it was choosing a career, picking a romantic partner, or deciding where to live. You probably told yourself that you weighed the pros and cons, analyzed the options logically, and made the smart choice. Your emotional brain made that decision instantly, based on unconscious psychological triggers you don't even recognize. Your rational mind just created a convincing story afterwards to make you feel intelligent about a choice you had already made. This is why people make decisions that seem completely irrational from the outside. They're not actually being irrational. They're being perfectly rational within the framework of their unconscious psychological programming. Every human being operates according to 3 hidden psychological systems that most people never become aware of. The first system is the survival brain. This is the most primitive part of your psychological makeup, and its only job is to keep you alive and safe. It doesn't care about logic, success, or long-term goals. It only cares about immediate threats and opportunities. When someone reacts defensively to feedback, when they resist change even when it would benefit them, when they choose comfort over growth, they're being controlled by their survival brain. This system operates entirely below conscious awareness, but it drives more human behavior than any other psychological force. The second system is the social brain. Humans evolved as tribal creatures, and our survival depended on our ability to fit in with the group. Your social brain is constantly scanning for social threats, opportunities to increase your status, and ways to maintain belonging within your tribe. When people conform to group opinion even when they know it's wrong, when they buy status symbols they can't afford, when they stay in toxic relationships or jobs because leaving would mean social rejection, they're being controlled by their social brain. This system is why peer pressure works on adults just as effectively as it works on teenagers. The third system is the meaning-making brain. Humans cannot tolerate uncertainty or randomness. We must create stories that explain everything that happens to us, even when those stories are completely inaccurate. Your meaning-making brain is constantly interpreting reality through the lens of your existing beliefs, filtering out information that contradicts what you already think you know, and creating narratives that make you feel like you understand what's happening. This is why two people can witness the exact same event and come away with completely different interpretations of what occurred. Here's the crucial insight. These three systems operate automatically and unconsciously. Most people have no idea they're being controlled by them. They think their thoughts are their own, their decisions are rational, and their reactions are justified. But they're wrong. They're biological machines running ancient psychological programming that was designed for a world that no longer exists. Once you understand this, everything changes. You stop taking people's reactions personally because you realize they're not really reacting to you. They're reacting to unconscious psychological triggers that you accidentally activated. You stop being confused by seemingly irrational behavior because you can see the hidden logic behind every human action. And most importantly, you stop being controlled by your own unconscious programming because awareness is the first step toward freedom. The people who truly understand human psychology know that logic is not what drives behavior. Emotion is what drives behavior, and logic is what we use to justify our emotional decisions afterwards. This is why facts don't change minds. This is why people don't do what's obviously in their best interest. And this is why the most influential people in the world focus on emotional triggers, not logical arguments. Chapter 2. The 6 invisible forces that control every human decision. While people believe they make decisions based on careful analysis and rational thinking, the truth is that every human decision is controlled by 6 invisible psychological forces. These forces operate below the level of conscious awareness, but they determine everything from what products people buy, to who they vote for, to who they fall in love with. Master these 6 forces, and you'll have more influence over human behavior than you ever thought possible. The first invisible force is social proof, and it is the most powerful influencer of human behavior that exists. Human beings are biologically programmed to look to others for guidance about how to think. When we're uncertain about what to do, we automatically scan our environment to see what other people are doing, then copy their behavior. This happens so unconsciously that most people don't even realize it's occurring. Social proof explains why restaurants put fake lines outside their establishments, why marketers use testimonials and reviews, and why laugh tracks make comedy shows seem funnier. When people see others engaging in a behavior, their brain interprets this as evidence that the behavior is correct, safe, and socially acceptable. The more people engaging in the behavior, the more powerful the social proof becomes. But here's what most people don't understand. Social proof doesn't require actual people. It can be manufactured through stories, statistics, and testimonials. When you tell someone that thousands of people have already made the same decision you're asking them to make, you're activating their social proof instinct. Their brain stops asking whether the decision is logical and starts asking whether they want to be part of the group or outside of it. The second invisible force is authority, and it bypasses critical thinking entirely. Human beings are hardwired to defer to authority figures, even when those authority figures are wrong, harmful, or completely unqualified. This psychological programming exists because throughout human history, following the tribal leader usually meant survival, while challenging authority usually meant death or exile. The authority principle explains why people follow medical advice from celebrities, why they believe news anchors over their own experiences, and why they obey rules that make no logical sense. When someone is perceived as an authority figure, their words carry exponentially more weight than the exact same words spoken by someone without authority markers. The fascinating aspect of authority is that it doesn't require actual expertise. This is why people wear white coats in commercials, why speakers list their credentials before making any substantive points, and why expensive suits and confident body language can instantly increase someone's influence. The third invisible force is reciprocity, and it creates psychological debt that people feel compelled to repay. When someone does something for you, gives you something, or provides value in any way, your brain automatically calculates that you owe them something in return. This happens even when you didn't ask for the favor, even when the gift was small, and even when you suspect the person has ulterior motives. Reciprocity explains why free samples increase sales, why politicians kiss babies and shake hands, and why the most influential people always give value before asking for anything in return. When you provide value to someone first, you're making a deposit in their psychological bank account. Later, when you make a request, their brain feels obligated to honor that request to balance the psychological books. The key to using reciprocity ethically is to provide genuine value without expecting immediate returns. When you help someone solve a problem, teach them something valuable, or make their life easier in any way, you're activating their reciprocity instinct. They will look for opportunities to return the favor, often in ways that are far more valuable than your original contribution. The fourth invisible force is consistency, and it locks people into patterns of behavior that can last for years or even decades. Human beings have a deep psychological need to be consistent with their previous decisions, statements, and self-image. Once someone takes a position or makes a commitment, especially if it's public or written down, their brain will work overtime to maintain consistency with that position, even when new evidence suggests they should change course. Consistency explains why people stay in bad jobs, maintain dysfunctional relationships, and continue voting for politicians who repeatedly disappoint them. It's not that they enjoy suffering, it's that changing course would require admitting they were wrong, which threatens their self-image and creates cognitive dissonance. The most powerful application of consistency is getting people to make small commitments that align with larger goals. When someone agrees to a small request that's consistent with a bigger request you'll make later, they've created a psychological pathway that makes the larger request much more likely to be accepted. Their brain wants to maintain consistency between their small action and their larger behavior. The fifth invisible force is scarcity, and it triggers the fear of loss that motivates more human behavior than the desire for gain. When something is perceived as rare, limited, or about to become unavailable, this happens because your survival brain interprets scarcity as a threat, activating fight or flight responses that bypass rational thinking entirely. Scarcity explains why limited time offers work, why people fight over the last item on a shelf, and why exclusive access to anything immediately makes it more desirable. When you create genuine scarcity around an opportunity, idea, or resource, you're activating one of the most powerful motivational forces in human psychology. The sixth invisible force is likability, and it determines whether people want to be influenced by you in the first place. Human beings prefer to say yes to people they like, trust, and feel connected to. This seems obvious, but what's not obvious is that likability can be systematically increased through understanding the psychological factors that create affinity between people. People like others who are similar to them, who give them genuine compliments, and who work toward shared goals. They also like people who are attractive, confident, and associated with positive experiences. When you consciously cultivate these likability factors, you're not being manipulative. Understanding these six forces gives you a completely different lens through which to view human behavior. Every decision, every reaction, every seemingly irrational choice can be understood as the result of one or more of these invisible forces activating in someone's unconscious mind. Chapter 3. Reading the hidden language of human behavior. While people focus on the words someone is saying, the real communication is happening through a hidden language that most people never learn to read. This hidden language consists of micro-expressions, body positioning, vocal tonality, and unconscious behavioral patterns that reveal what someone is actually thinking and feeling, regardless of what they're saying with their words. The human face contains over 40 muscle groups that create thousands of possible expressions, most of which happen so quickly that they barely register in conscious awareness. These micro-expressions last for fractions of a second, but they reveal the true emotional state behind whatever someone is pretending to feel. Learning to read micro-expressions gives you the ability to see through deception, understand hidden emotions, and predict how someone will behave before they know it themselves. The 7 universal micro-expressions are happiness, sadness, anger. These expressions are the same across all cultures and appear automatically when someone experiences the corresponding emotion, even when they're trying to hide it. A flash of contempt that lasts 1/10 of a second tells you more about someone's true opinion than 10 minutes of polite conversation. When someone's words don't match their micro-expressions, believe the micro-expressions. The conscious mind can control words, but it cannot control the automatic facial responses that leak true emotions. This is why politicians practice their facial expressions as much as their speeches, and why master negotiators always watch faces instead of listening to opening positions. But micro-expressions are just the beginning. The human body is constantly broadcasting information about internal psychological states through posture, gesture, movement, and spatial positioning. These signals operate entirely below conscious awareness, but they reveal everything from confidence levels to deception, to romantic interest, to hidden aggression. When someone is confident, their body naturally expands. They take up more space, their shoulders broaden, their posture straightens, and their movements become more purposeful. When someone lacks confidence, their body contracts. They cross their arms, hunch their shoulders, touch their face or neck, and minimize their physical presence. These changes happen automatically and unconsciously, but they're immediately visible to anyone who knows what to look for. Deception creates specific patterns of body language that are nearly impossible to suppress. When someone is lying, their body naturally wants to create distance from the deception. They'll lean away, create barriers with their arms or objects, reduce eye contact, and increase self-soothing behaviors like touching their face or playing with their hair. Their movements become more restricted and controlled because their conscious mind is working overtime to manage the deception. The most revealing aspect of body language is what happens during transitions. When someone changes topics, when they're asked unexpected questions, or when they're forced to address something they'd rather avoid, their body language shifts before their words catch up. These transition moments reveal true attitudes and emotions that people work hard to conceal during normal conversation. Vocal tonality carries even more information than body language because it's almost completely unconscious. The human voice contains dozens of variables, including pitch, pace, volume, rhythm, breathiness, tension, and resonance. Each of these variables changes automatically based on emotional state, stress level, confidence, and truthfulness. Learning to read vocal patterns gives you access to someone's internal psychological state in real time. When someone is nervous or stressed, their vocal pitch rises, their pace increases, and their breathing becomes shallow. When someone is confident and relaxed, their voice becomes deeper, their pace slows down, and their words carry more resonance. When someone is being deceptive, their voice often becomes more controlled and less natural, with longer pauses and more careful word selection. The most powerful vocal indicator is incongruence between content and delivery. When someone says they're excited but their voice is flat, when they claim to be confident but their voice is shaky, when they insist they're telling the truth but their voice becomes tight and controlled, their vocal patterns are revealing their true internal state. But reading body language and vocal patterns is only useful if you understand what drives the behavior you're observing. Every physical expression of emotion and thought is connected to underlying psychological patterns that determine how someone will behave in different situations. When you see someone displaying dominance behaviors like expanded posture, direct eye contact, and controlled movement, you're seeing someone who feels psychologically safe and in control. They're likely to be more willing to take risks, make decisions quickly, and resist influence attempts. When you see someone displaying submission behaviors like contracted posture, reduced eye contact, and fidgety movement, you're seeing someone who feels psychologically threatened or uncertain. They're likely to be more cautious, more influenceable, and more focused on avoiding mistakes than creating opportunities. The key insight is that these behavioral patterns are not random. They're predictable responses to psychological states and social dynamics. When you understand the psychological forces that create specific behavioral patterns, you can predict how someone will respond to different approaches, what motivates them, and what they're likely to do next. This gives you an enormous advantage in every human interaction. Instead of guessing what someone is thinking or feeling, you can read their hidden language and respond appropriately. Instead of being confused by mixed signals, you can see the unconscious patterns that explain seemingly contradictory behavior. And instead of being reactive to whatever someone presents on the surface, you can be strategic based on what's actually happening beneath their conscious awareness. Chapter 4. The Psychology of Influence and Persuasion. Most people think influence is about having good arguments, being persistent, or having authority over others. They're completely wrong. Real influence operates at the psychological level, where decisions are actually made, not at the logical level, where people pretend decisions are made. Understanding the psychology of influence means understanding how to align your requests with the unconscious decision-making patterns that actually control human behavior. The foundation of all influence is trust. But trust is not what most people think it is. Trust is not about being trustworthy in the moral sense, though that's certainly important. Trust is about being predictable in ways that make someone's brain feel safe. When someone's unconscious mind perceives you as predictable, non-threatening, and aligned with their interests, their psychological defenses lower, and they become open to your influence. Trust is built through 3 specific mechanisms that operate below conscious awareness. The first mechanism is similarity. People trust others who are like them because similar people are perceived as having similar interests and motivations. This similarity can be demographic, but it's much more powerful when it's behavioral, emotional, or philosophical. When you mirror someone's communication style, match their energy level, and reflect their values back to them, you're activating their similarity trust triggers. The second mechanism is consistency. People trust others whose behavior is predictable and reliable. when you do what you say you'll do, when you show up consistently, and when your behavior aligns with your stated values. You're demonstrating the kind of predictability that makes someone's brain classify you as safe and trustworthy. Inconsistency triggers threat detection systems and makes influence nearly impossible. The third mechanism is competence. People trust others who demonstrate the ability to deliver results in areas that matter to them. This competence doesn't have to be in the exact area where you're seeking influence, but it does have to be visible and relevant. When you demonstrate expertise, share valuable insights, or solve problems effectively, you're building competence-based trust that transfers to other areas of interaction. Once trust is established, influence becomes a matter of psychological positioning. The most powerful influence technique is reframing, which means changing how someone thinks about a situation without changing the facts of the situation. Every situation can be interpreted multiple ways, and whichever interpretation dominates someone's thinking determines their emotional response and behavioral choices. When you want someone to take action, you reframe the situation as an opportunity rather than a risk. When you want someone to change their mind, you reframe new information as consistent with their existing beliefs rather than contradictory to them. When you want someone to say yes to a request, you reframe the request as aligned with their goals rather than as a favor for you. The key to effective reframing is understanding someone's psychological priorities. Everyone has unconscious hierarchies of what matters most to them, whether that's security, status, freedom, connection, achievement, or meaning. When you frame your request in terms of their highest psychological priority, their brain interprets saying yes as serving their own interests rather than serving yours. Another fundamental influence principle is the psychology of choice architecture. The way options are presented dramatically influences which option someone will choose, even when the underlying options remain exactly the same. This happens because people don't evaluate choices in absolute terms. They evaluate choices relative to other available options and relative to how those options are framed. When you want someone to choose a particular option, you don't focus on making that option perfect. This might mean introducing a decoy option that makes your preferred choice look better by comparison, or it might mean changing the order in which options are presented to take advantage of psychological biases like anchoring and recency effects. The most sophisticated influence technique is creating what psychologists call psychological ownership. When someone feels like they participated in creating a solution, developing an idea, or reaching a conclusion, they become psychologically invested in that outcome. Their brain treats it as their own idea, which means they'll defend it, implement it, and promote it. You create psychological ownership by asking questions that guide someone to discover conclusions for themselves, rather than telling them what to think. You involve them in the problem-solving process, ask for their input on implementation details, and acknowledge their contributions to the final result. When someone feels like a collaborator rather than a target of influence, they become advocates for the outcome. The timing of influence attempts is just as important as the content of influence attempts. People are more open to influence when they're in positive emotional states, when they're not feeling defensive or threatened, and when they have the mental bandwidth to process new information. This means the most effective influencers pay as much attention to when they make requests as to how they make requests. The psychological state that's most conducive to influence is what researchers call relaxed attention. This is when someone is alert and engaged, but not stressed or defensive. They're focused on the conversation, but not overwhelmed by competing priorities. Creating and maintaining this state requires careful attention to environmental factors, emotional dynamics, and conversation flow. Finally, the most ethical and sustainable approach to influence is what could be called aligned influence. This means only attempting to influence people in directions that genuinely serve their interests, as well as your own. When you're trying to influence someone to do something that's bad for them but good for you, you're creating resistance at the unconscious level that makes influence much more difficult and less sustainable. When your influence attempts are aligned with someone's genuine interests, their unconscious mind becomes your ally rather than your obstacle. They want to be influenced because being influenced serves their own goals. This creates a positive feedback loop where successful influence strengthens the relationship and makes future influence even more effective. Chapter 5. Advanced Behavioral Prediction. The ultimate goal of understanding human psychology is not just to read what someone is thinking and feeling right now, but to predict what they will think, feel, and do in the future. Behavioral prediction seems like magic, but it's actually a systematic process based on understanding the psychological patterns that determine how different personality types respond to different situations. Every person operates according to unconscious psychological patterns that remain consistent across different contexts and time periods. These patterns are formed early in life and become deeply ingrained in the neural pathways that control decision-making, emotional responses, and behavioral choices. Once you understand someone's core psychological patterns, their future behavior becomes highly predictable. The first step in behavioral prediction is identifying someone's primary psychological drivers. Everyone is motivated by a combination of basic human needs, including security, significance, variety, connection, growth, and contribution. But each person has a unique hierarchy of these needs that determines their priorities, fears, and decision-making criteria. Someone whose primary driver is security will consistently choose options that minimize risk, preserve stability, and protect what they already have. They'll resist change even when change would benefit them. They'll prefer proven solutions over innovative approaches, and they'll prioritize safety over opportunity. Once you identify security as someone's primary driver, you can predict with high accuracy how they'll respond to proposals, challenges, and decisions. Someone whose primary driver is significance will consistently choose options that enhance their status, recognition, and sense of importance. They'll take risks if those risks come with potential for increased recognition. They'll prefer being a big fish in a small pond over being anonymous in a large organization, and they'll prioritize being right over being effective. Understanding significance as a primary driver allows you to predict their reactions to feedback, their response to competition, and their career choices. The second step in behavioral prediction is understanding someone's stress response patterns. Everyone has predictable ways of responding when they feel threatened, overwhelmed, or under pressure. These stress responses are automatic and unconscious, but they reveal core aspects of personality that remain consistent across situations. Some people respond to stress by becoming more controlling and directive. Others respond to stress by becoming more collaborative and consensus-seeking. They'll slow down decision-making, involve more people in the process, and focus on maintaining relationships even while addressing problems. Some people respond to stress by withdrawing and becoming analytical. They'll gather more information, delay decisions until they feel more certain, and prefer to solve problems independently. Others respond to stress by becoming more expressive and externally focused. They'll talk through problems out loud, seek support from others, and make decisions based more on gut feelings than careful analysis. These stress response patterns are incredibly useful for behavioral prediction because stress situations reveal authentic personality characteristics that people often mask during normal circumstances. When you know how someone responds to pressure, you can predict not only their behavior during crisis situations, but also their underlying psychological makeup that influences their behavior during normal situations. The third step in behavioral prediction is understanding someone's cognitive biases and decision-making shortcuts. Everyone uses mental shortcuts called heuristics to process information and make decisions quickly. These shortcuts are generally useful, but they create predictable patterns of error and bias that can be anticipated once you understand them. Some people have a strong confirmation bias, which means they seek information that confirms what they already believe and ignore information that contradicts their existing opinions. Once you identify this pattern, you can predict that they'll be resistant to new ideas that challenge their worldview. They'll interpret ambiguous information in ways that support their existing beliefs, and they'll surround themselves with people who share their opinions. Some people have a strong availability bias, which means they overweight information that's easily recalled and underweight information that's more abstract or statistical. Once you identify this pattern, you can predict that they'll be strongly influenced by recent events, personal experiences, and vivid stories, and logical arguments. The fourth step in behavioral prediction is understanding someone's values hierarchy. Everyone has unconscious rankings of what's most important to them, whether that's family, achievement, creativity, justice. These values hierarchies determine how people make trade-offs when different options serve different values. Someone who values achievement above security will consistently choose challenging opportunities over comfortable situations, even when the challenging opportunities involve significant risk. Someone who values family above career advancement will consistently choose options that preserve family relationships over options that enhance professional success, even when the professional opportunities are objectively superior. Understanding someone's values hierarchy allows you to predict their behavior in complex situations where multiple factors are competing for their attention. You can anticipate which factors they'll prioritize, which trade-offs they'll be willing to make, and which outcomes they'll find most satisfying. The final step in behavioral prediction is understanding someone's unconscious relationship patterns. Everyone has typical ways of relating to authority figures, peers, subordinates, and strangers that remain consistent across different relationships and contexts. These patterns are often invisible to the person exhibiting them, but they're clearly visible to outside observers who know what to look for. Some people unconsciously seek approval from authority figures, which means they'll modify their behavior to please bosses, experts, and other high-status individuals. Some people unconsciously resist authority, which means they'll question directives, challenge conventional wisdom, and prefer to make their own decisions regardless of external guidance. Some people unconsciously compete with peers, which means they'll view colleagues as rivals, compare their performance to others constantly, and prefer individual recognition over team success. Some people unconsciously collaborate with peers, which means they'll share information freely, prefer group achievements over individual accomplishments. When you combine understanding of psychological drivers, stress responses, cognitive biases, values, hierarchies, and relationship patterns, you develop an incredibly accurate model for predicting how someone will behave in virtually any situation. This predictive ability gives you enormous advantages in negotiations, leadership, sales, relationships, and any other context where understanding and influencing human behavior matters. Chapter 6. The Psychology of Emotional Control. Most people believe that emotions are something that happen to them, random psychological events that they must endure or fight against. This belief keeps them trapped in reactive patterns that sabotage their success, relationships, and decision-making ability. But here's what neuroscience has revealed. Emotions are not random events. They are predictable psychological responses that can be understood, controlled, and strategically deployed to achieve your goals. The first thing you must understand is that emotions are created by your unconscious interpretation of events, not by the events themselves. Two people can experience the exact same situation and have completely different emotional responses because their brains are interpreting the situation differently. This means that emotional control is not about suppressing feelings or pretending they don't exist. It's about changing the unconscious interpretations that create emotions in the first place. Your brain operates according to what neuroscientists call predictive processing. This means your brain is constantly trying to predict what will happen next based on past experiences and current information. When reality matches your brain's predictions, you feel calm and in control. When reality violates your brain's predictions, you experience negative emotions like anxiety, anger, or frustration. The key to emotional control is learning to update your brain's predictive models in real time. When you feel a negative emotion arising, instead of being consumed by it, you ask yourself what prediction your brain made that isn't matching reality. Then you consciously update that prediction with more accurate information. This process rewires your neural pathways and changes your automatic emotional responses to similar situations in the future. The second principle of emotional control is understanding that emotions have specific physiological signatures that can be interrupted before they take control of your behavior. Every emotion creates a cascade of chemical and physical changes in your body. Anger increases your heart rate, tightens your jaw, and floods your system with stress hormones. Fear creates shallow breathing, muscle tension, and heightened alertness. Anxiety produces restlessness, digestive changes, and scattered attention. When you learn to recognize these physiological signatures early, you can interrupt the emotional cascade before it overwhelms your rational thinking. The most effective technique is controlled breathing, which directly influences your autonomic nervous system and resets your emotional state. When you feel an unwanted emotion beginning, immediately shift to slow, deep breathing with longer exhales than inhales. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system and prevents the emotion from escalating into reactive behavior. The third principle of emotional control is strategic emotional positioning. Instead of trying to eliminate negative emotions entirely, you learn to position yourself emotionally in ways that serve your goals. Different emotional states create different cognitive capabilities, and the most psychologically sophisticated people deliberately cultivate the emotional states that enhance their performance in specific situations. When you need to be creative or innovative, you cultivate positive emotions like curiosity and excitement, because these states broaden your thinking and increase your ability to see new connections and possibilities. When you need to analyze complex problems or make careful decisions, you cultivate neutral emotions like calm focus, because these states narrow your attention and increase your analytical precision. When you need to negotiate or influence others, you cultivate confident emotions like controlled intensity, because these states project authority and make others more likely to defer to your judgment. The fourth principle is emotional contagion mastery. Human emotions are highly contagious because of mirror neurons in your brain that automatically mimic the emotional states of people around you. Most people are completely unconscious of this process, which means they're constantly absorbing other people's emotions and mistaking those emotions for their own authentic feelings. When you master emotional contagion, you flip this dynamic completely. Instead of absorbing other people's emotions, you become the emotional leader in every interaction. You consciously project the emotional state you want others to experience, and their mirror neurons automatically sync to your emotional frequency. This gives you tremendous influence over group dynamics, negotiations, and relationship outcomes. The most advanced level of emotional control is what could be called emotional aikido. Instead of fighting against difficult emotions or trying to suppress them, you learn to redirect their energy toward productive outcomes. Anger can be redirected into focused determination. Anxiety can be redirected into careful preparation. Frustration can be redirected into creative problem solving. Fear can be redirected into heightened awareness and strategic caution. This redirection process requires understanding that emotions are not inherently positive or negative. They are sources of energy and information that can be channeled in constructive or destructive directions. When you experience a strong emotion, instead of judging it as good or bad, you ask what this emotion is trying to tell you and how its energy can be used to serve your goals. The final aspect of emotional control is developing what psychologists call emotional granularity. Most people have very limited emotional vocabularies and lump complex feelings into broad categories like good or bad, happy or sad, stressed or relaxed. This emotional imprecision makes it impossible to respond appropriately to what you're actually feeling. When you develop emotional granularity, you can distinguish between dozens of different emotional states and understand the specific message and energy that each emotion provides. You can tell the difference between anxiety about uncertainty and anxiety about inadequacy, between anger about injustice and anger about loss of control, between excitement about possibility and excitement about competition. This precise emotional awareness allows you to respond to emotions with surgical precision rather than broad emotional reactions that often make situations worse rather than better. Chapter 7. Mental Manipulation. Defense Systems. Every single day, you are the target of sophisticated psychological manipulation attempts designed to control your behavior and shape your decisions in ways that serve other people's interests rather than your own. Most of these manipulation attempts succeed because people don't recognize them as manipulation. They appear as normal social interaction, helpful advice, or reasonable requests. The first step in defending against manipulation is understanding that manipulation is not always malicious or conscious. Many people manipulate others unconsciously because they've learned that certain psychological tactics get them what they want. They may not realize they're being manipulative, but the effect on you is the same regardless of their intentions. Conscious manipulators, however, are a different category entirely. These are people who deliberately study psychological vulnerabilities and exploit them systematically. They include narcissistic individuals who manipulate for control, salespeople who manipulate for profit, and sociopathic personalities who manipulate for entertainment. Understanding their techniques is essential for protecting yourself from psychological exploitation. The foundation of all manipulation is creating artificial urgency or scarcity that bypasses your rational decision-making process. Manipulators know that when you feel pressured to decide quickly, you're more likely to rely on emotional impulses rather than careful analysis. They create time pressure through phrases like, "This offer expires tonight. I need an answer right now." Or, "If you don't act immediately, you'll miss this opportunity." The defense against artificial urgency is the 24-hour rule. Whenever someone pressures you to make an immediate decision, especially a decision involving money, commitments, or significant changes to your life, you automatically invoke a 24-hour waiting period. You tell them you need time to consider their proposal, and you refuse to engage with any pressure tactics designed to override this boundary. Real opportunities don't disappear because you take time to think about them. Manipulative opportunities are designed to evaporate under scrutiny, which is why manipulators always create artificial time pressure. The second major manipulation technique is emotional guilt and obligation. Manipulators make you feel like you owe them something, like you're being selfish or ungrateful if you don't comply with their requests, or like you're responsible for their emotional well-being. They use phrases like, "After everything I've done for you, I thought you cared about me," or "You're being selfish." The defense against guilt manipulation is understanding that you are never responsible for other people's emotions, choices, or outcomes. You can be considerate and caring without being obligated to sacrifice your own interests for someone else's emotional management. When someone tries to make you feel guilty for setting boundaries or making choices that serve your own interests, that's a red flag that they're attempting to manipulate you. The third manipulation technique is gaslighting, which involves making you question your own perceptions, memories, and judgment. Gaslighters tell you that things you remember happening didn't actually happen, that your emotional reactions are inappropriate or excessive, or that your interpretation of events is wrong. They gradually erode your confidence in your own ability to perceive reality accurately. The defense against gaslighting is maintaining detailed records of important conversations and events, especially when dealing with people who have a pattern of contradicting your recollections. You trust your own perceptions unless presented with clear evidence to the contrary, and you refuse to engage in debates about your own emotional experiences or memories. The fourth manipulation technique is love bombing followed by withdrawal. This is particularly common in romantic relationships and involves overwhelming someone with excessive attention, affection, and promises, then suddenly becoming cold, distant, or critical. This creates an addiction-like cycle where you become desperate to regain the intense positive attention you experienced initially. The defense against love bombing is recognizing that genuine affection and interest develops gradually and consistently over time. When someone's attention feels too intense too quickly, or when their behavior toward you fluctuates dramatically between extremely positive and extremely negative, these are warning signs of manipulative relationship patterns. The fifth manipulation technique is isolation and dependency creation. Manipulators gradually separate you from other sources of support, perspective, and resources, so that you become dependent on them for validation, information, and assistance. They criticize your friends and family, discourage activities that don't involve them, and position themselves as your primary source of guidance and support. The defense against isolation is maintaining diverse relationships and perspectives, regardless of what any single person in your life prefers. You continue nurturing friendships, seeking advice from multiple sources, and engaging in activities that fulfill you independently of any particular relationship. The most sophisticated manipulation technique is called triangulation, where manipulators create artificial competition, drama, or comparison to control your behavior. They might tell you about other people who are interested in opportunities they're offering you, suggest that others are questioning your commitment or capability, or create situations where you feel like you need to prove your worth relative to others. The defense against triangulation is refusing to engage in competitive dynamics that someone else has created. You make decisions based on whether opportunities genuinely serve your interests, not based on artificial competition or comparison with others. The final defense system is developing what could be called manipulation radar. This is the ability to recognize manipulation attempts quickly based on how they make you feel, rather than just analyzing the content of what's being said. Manipulation attempts create specific emotional signatures, including artificial urgency, confusion about your own perceptions, guilt about normal boundaries, and pressure to prove your worth or loyalty. When you notice these emotional signatures during an interaction, you immediately shift into defensive mode. You slow down the conversation, ask clarifying questions, and refuse to make decisions while experiencing emotional pressure. You trust your instincts when something feels manipulative, even if you can't articulate exactly what's wrong with the interaction. Chapter 8. The Architecture of Persuasive Communication. Most people believe that persuasive communication is about having better arguments, speaking more confidently, or being more persistent. They focus on what they're saying while completely ignoring how their message is being received and processed by the other person's brain. Real persuasive communication is not about what you say. It's about designing your message to align with how the human brain actually processes information and makes decisions. The human brain processes information in a specific sequence that most people never learn. Understanding this sequence allows you to structure your communication in ways that dramatically increase your persuasive impact. The brain first determines whether you are friend or foe, then decides whether your message is relevant to immediate survival needs, then evaluates whether your information matches existing beliefs, and finally considers the logical content of your message. This means that logic and rational arguments are actually the least important part of persuasive communication, even though most people spend all their time focusing on logical arguments. If someone's brain has classified you as a threat, determined that your message isn't relevant to their immediate concerns, or decided that your information contradicts their existing beliefs, they will never reach the point where they objectively evaluate your logical arguments. The first element of persuasive architecture is establishing psychological safety. Before anyone will be open to your influence, their brain must determine that you are not a threat to their status, security, or identity. This happens through subtle communication signals, including matching their communication style, acknowledging their perspective before presenting your own, and demonstrating that you understand their concerns and interests. Psychological safety is destroyed by communication patterns that trigger threat responses, including interrupting, contradicting without acknowledgement, speaking in ways that suggest superiority, or presenting information that directly challenges their identity or competence. When someone feels threatened, their brain activates defensive systems that make persuasion virtually impossible. The second element is relevance establishment. You must connect your message to something the other person already cares about before they will invest attention in understanding what you're trying to communicate. This requires understanding their current priorities, concerns, and interests, then positioning your message as relevant to those existing motivations. Relevance cannot be assumed or imposed. It must be explicitly established through language that connects your message to their acknowledged goals, problems, or desires. When you skip relevance establishment, people may listen politely to your message, but they won't be psychologically engaged with processing it seriously. The third element is belief bridge construction. Instead of challenging someone's existing beliefs directly, you build bridges between their current beliefs and the new information you want them to accept. You find aspects of their existing worldview that are compatible with your message and use those as entry points for introducing new concepts. Direct belief challenges activate confirmation bias and make people more resistant to your message. Belief bridges make new information feel like a natural extension of what someone already thinks, rather than a contradiction of their existing worldview. The fourth element is emotional resonance creation. Information that connects to someone's emotions is processed more deeply and remembered more clearly than information that remains purely logical. You create emotional resonance by using language that evokes feelings, telling stories that illustrate your points, and connecting your message to outcomes that matter to them emotionally. The most powerful emotions for persuasive communication are not positive emotions like happiness and excitement, but identity-relevant emotions like pride, fear of loss, desire for significance, and need for security. When your message connects to these deeper emotional drivers, it becomes personally important rather than just intellectually interesting. The fifth element is social proof integration. Because humans are social creatures who look to others for guidance about appropriate behavior, messages that include social proof are inherently more persuasive than messages that rely purely on logical arguments or emotional appeals. You integrate social proof by including examples of similar people who have already accepted your message, statistics that show widespread adoption of your ideas, or testimonials from credible sources. The key to effective social proof is ensuring that your examples are relevant to your audience. Social proof from people who are too different from your audience actually reduces persuasion because it suggests that your message is for other people rather than for them. The sixth element is implementation pathway clarity. Even when someone is intellectually and emotionally convinced by your message, they won't take action unless they understand exactly what they're supposed to do next. You must provide crystal clear next steps that are specific, achievable, and aligned with their current capabilities and resources. Vague action steps like think about it or consider your options are persuasion killers because they require the other person to figure out implementation details for themselves. Clear action steps like call this number tomorrow morning or send me an email by Friday with your decision remove implementation barriers, and make follow-through much more likely. The seventh element is resistance, anticipation. Every persuasive message will encounter some form of psychological resistance, whether that's skepticism about your credibility, concerns about the consequences of accepting your message, or simple inertia against changing existing patterns. The most persuasive communicators anticipate likely sources of resistance and address them proactively rather than waiting for them to emerge. This might involve acknowledging potential downsides to your proposal before the other person raises them, providing evidence that addresses likely skepticism, or offering guarantees that reduce the perceived risk of accepting your message. The final element is commitment. Once someone has accepted your message and agreed to take action, you reinforce their commitment by helping them articulate why their decision makes sense and creating accountability mechanisms that make follow-through more likely. Commitment reinforcement transforms persuasion from a one-time event into an ongoing process that increases the probability that initial agreement will translate into sustained behavioral change. Chapter 9. Advanced Social Dynamics and Power Psychology. Human beings exist within invisible hierarchies that determine everything from who speaks first in meetings to whose ideas get taken seriously, to who gets promoted and who gets ignored. Most people are completely unaware of these hierarchical dynamics, which means they unconsciously accept whatever position they're assigned by others. Understanding power psychology allows you to recognize these invisible hierarchies and position yourself strategically within them. Power in social interactions is not primarily about formal authority, wealth, or credentials, though these can be factors. Real power comes from psychological positioning that makes others instinctively defer to your judgment. This psychological positioning is created through specific communication patterns, behavioral choices, and social strategies that operate below the level of conscious awareness. The foundation of social power is what researchers call frame control. Every social interaction occurs within a psychological framework that determines how the interaction is interpreted and what behaviors are considered appropriate. The person who controls the frame controls the interaction. Most people unconsciously accept whatever frame is established by others, but strategic thinkers learn to establish and maintain their own frames. Frame control is established through several mechanisms. The first is reality definition, which means you state your interpretation of what's happening, what it means, and what should happen next with enough confidence that others accept your interpretation as objective reality. When someone challenges your frame, you don't argue with their alternative interpretation. You simply restate your frame as if their challenge didn't occur. The second mechanism is emotional tone setting. The person who establishes the emotional tone of an interaction typically controls the direction and outcome of that interaction. If you remain calm and centered while others become reactive, you become the stable point around which the interaction revolves. If you project confidence and certainty while others express doubt, you become the authority that others look to for guidance. The third mechanism is agenda control. You control the frame by determining what topics are discussed, in what order they're addressed, and how much time is spent on each subject. You guide the conversation toward outcomes that serve your interests, while making others feel like they're participating in a collaborative discussion. The second major aspect of power psychology is status signaling. Humans are constantly broadcasting and reading status signals that determine their position in social hierarchies. These signals are largely unconscious, but tremendously powerful in shaping how others respond to you. Learning to read and project appropriate status signals gives you enormous influence over social dynamics. High-status behaviors include speaking at a measured pace with strategic pauses, maintaining relaxed but attentive posture, taking up appropriate space, making direct eye contact without staring, and responding to questions thoughtfully rather than immediately. High-status people also demonstrate selective attention, meaning they don't feel compelled to respond to every comment, or acknowledge every person equally. Low-status behaviors include speaking quickly or hesitantly, fidgeting or self-soothing gestures, contracting body posture, avoiding eye contact, and responding immediately to every question or comment. Low-status people also demonstrate scattered attention, trying to please everyone and respond to every social cue, rather than maintaining focus on their own agenda. The key insight is that status is largely performative. People assign you whatever status you consistently demonstrate through your behavior patterns. This means you can consciously adjust your status signals to match the social positioning you want to achieve. The third aspect of power psychology is coalition building. Very little significant achievement happens through individual effort alone. Success requires the ability to build alliances, create mutual benefit relationships, and mobilize others around shared objectives. This requires understanding what motivates different types of people and how to position your goals as aligned with their interests. Effective coalition building starts with understanding that different people are motivated by different psychological drivers. Some people are motivated primarily by recognition and will support initiatives that make them look good. Some people are motivated by security and will support initiatives that reduce risk or protect existing resources. Some people are motivated by growth and will support initiatives that provide learning opportunities or new challenges. The most effective coalition builders don't try to motivate everyone the same way. They customize their approach based on each person's primary psychological drivers and show how supporting the initiative serves that person's specific interests and values. The fourth aspect is influence currency management. In social and professional environments, influence operates like an economic system where you accumulate and spend different types of currency. These currencies include credibility, currency earned through demonstrated competence, relationship currency earned through providing value to others, information currency earned through access to valuable knowledge, and resource currency earned through control of assets or opportunities. Strategic individuals consciously accumulate these currencies during normal times, so they can spend them when they need to achieve important objectives. They also understand that different currencies have different values in different contexts, and they adjust their accumulation and spending strategies accordingly. The fifth aspect is strategic vulnerability and authenticity. Contrary to what many people believe, strategic vulnerability actually increases your social power rather than decreasing it. When you selectively share challenges you're facing, mistakes you've made, or uncertainties you're experiencing, you create psychological intimacy that makes others more likely to trust and support you. The key is that this vulnerability must be strategic rather than compulsive. You share vulnerabilities that humanize you without undermining your competence, that create connection without creating concern about your ability to deliver results, and that invite support without creating obligation or burden. The final aspect of power psychology is situational adaptability. Different social contexts require different approaches to power and influence. The strategies that work in corporate environments may be counterproductive in creative environments. The approaches that work with analytical personalities may backfire with relationship-oriented personalities. The most socially powerful people are those who can read the social context accurately and adjust their approach accordingly. They understand that power is not a fixed characteristic, but a dynamic relationship that changes based on context, relationships, and objectives. Chapter 10. The Psychology of Decision-Making Under Pressure. When people are under pressure, their decision-making processes change dramatically in ways that most people don't understand. And high stakes activate different parts of the brain and create predictable patterns of decision-making that can either enhance or sabotage performance, depending on whether you understand how to work with these patterns rather than against them. The first thing that happens under pressure is that your brain shifts from deliberative thinking to automatic thinking. Under normal circumstances, you have access to your full analytical capabilities and can carefully weigh options, consider long-term consequences, and make decisions based on complex reasoning. Under pressure, your brain shifts to rapid pattern recognition and emotional decision-making that prioritizes speed over accuracy. This shift happens because your survival brain interprets pressure as potential threat. From an evolutionary perspective, taking time to carefully analyze a potential predator would get you killed. So your brain automatically shifts to fight or flight decision-making that prioritizes immediate response over optimal outcomes. Understanding this shift allows you to prepare for pressure situations by preloading your automatic thinking with high-quality decision patterns. This means identifying the types of pressure situations you're likely to face, determining the optimal responses to those situations in advance, and rehearsing those responses until they become automatic. The second major change under pressure is that your attention narrows dramatically. Under normal circumstances, you can maintain awareness of multiple factors, consider various perspectives, and keep track of subtle but important details. Under pressure, your attention becomes laser-focused on what your brain perceives as the most immediate threat or opportunity, and you become blind to everything else. This attention narrowing can be beneficial when you need to focus intensively on a specific task, but it becomes problematic when optimal decisions require considering multiple factors simultaneously. The key is learning to artificially broaden your attention during pressure situations by using systematic checklists and decision frameworks that force you to consider factors. The third change is that your risk assessment becomes heavily biased toward avoiding losses rather than pursuing gains. Under pressure, your brain dramatically overweights potential negative outcomes and underweights potential positive outcomes. This happens because your survival brain is designed to keep you alive, not to help you achieve optimal results. And staying alive requires avoiding catastrophic losses more than it requires maximizing gains. This loss avoidance bias can cause you to make overly conservative decisions that minimize immediate risk while sacrificing long-term opportunity. The counter strategy is to deliberately force yourself to consider potential positive outcomes and long-term gains. When making decisions under pressure, even when your emotional instincts are focused entirely on avoiding immediate losses. The fourth change is that your time horizon shrinks dramatically. Under pressure, you become focused on immediate outcomes and lose perspective on long-term consequences. Decisions that might have significant negative impacts months or years in the future seem acceptable if they solve immediate problems, while decisions that require short-term sacrifice for long-term benefit seem unacceptable. This shortened time horizon can lead to decisions that solve immediate problems while creating larger future problems. The solution is to build long-term thinking into your pressure decision-making process by systematically asking yourself how potential decisions will affect you in 1 month, 1 year, and 5 years. The fifth change is that your social awareness decreases significantly. Under pressure, you become less able to read social cues, understand others' perspectives, and consider how your decisions will affect relationships and group dynamics. Your brain becomes self-focused and loses much of its capacity for empathy and social intelligence. This reduced social awareness can lead to decisions that solve immediate problems while creating relationship conflicts or damaging your reputation. The counter strategy is to explicitly consider stakeholder impacts when making pressure decisions, even when your natural inclination is to focus solely on immediate task completion. The most effective approach to pressure decision-making is developing what could be called pressure protocols. These are predetermined decision frameworks that you can implement automatically when you recognize that you're in a high-pressure situation. These protocols compensate for the predictable ways that pressure degrades decision-making quality. A basic pressure protocol might include taking 3 deep breaths to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, explicitly identifying what type of decision you're facing, consulting your predetermined criteria for this type of decision, systematically considering both potential gains and potential losses, and checking your decision against your long-term goals and values. The final aspect of pressure decision-making is learning to distinguish between real pressure and artificial pressure. Many situations that feel urgent and high stakes are actually neither urgent nor high stakes. Real pressure involves genuine time constraints, significant consequences, and limited options. Artificial pressure is created by other people who want you to make quick decisions that serve their interests rather than your own. By your own anxiety about uncertain outcomes, or by your perfectionism that makes every decision feel more consequential than it actually is. Learning to recognize artificial pressure allows you to slow down and use your full decision-making capabilities in situations where pressure responses are unnecessary and counterproductive. This dramatically improves the quality of your decisions and reduces the stress you experience in daily life. Chapter 11. Advanced Pattern Recognition in Human Behavior. The highest level of psychological mastery is developing the ability to recognize behavioral patterns before they fully emerge, allowing you to predict and respond to human behavior with almost supernatural accuracy. Most people react to what has already happened, but pattern recognition masters see what is about to happen and position themselves accordingly. This capability transforms you from someone who responds to human behavior into someone who anticipates and guides it. Human behavior operates according to predictable patterns that repeat across different people. These patterns exist because all humans share the same basic psychological architecture, face similar fundamental challenges, and respond to universal psychological triggers. Once you understand these universal patterns, individual behavior becomes remarkably predictable. The first category of behavioral patterns is what could be called stress response signatures. Every person has a unique but consistent way of responding when they feel threatened, overwhelmed, or under pressure. Some people become more aggressive and controlling. Others become withdrawn and analytical. Others become people-pleasing and accommodating. These stress responses are established early in life and remain remarkably consistent throughout adulthood. Learning to identify someone's stress response signature allows you to predict how they'll behave in challenging situations before those situations arise. When you see early signs of stress in someone, you can anticipate whether they'll become more difficult to work with or more compliant, whether they'll make decisions quickly or slowly, whether they'll seek support or isolate themselves. The second category is motivation pattern recognition. Everyone has unconscious hierarchies of what drives their behavior, whether that's achievement, security, recognition, autonomy, connection, or meaning. These motivation patterns determine what energizes someone, what they'll work hardest to achieve, and what they'll sacrifice other things to protect. When you identify someone's primary motivation pattern, you can predict what opportunities they'll be drawn to, what challenges they'll avoid, what rewards will actually motivate them, and what losses they'll fight hardest to prevent. This knowledge allows you to design interactions that align with their motivation patterns rather than working against them. The third category is decision-making pattern recognition. People make decisions according to consistent internal processes that reflect their personality, values, and cognitive preferences. Some people are rapid decision-makers who rely on intuition and pattern recognition. Others are deliberate decision-makers who require extensive analysis and consultation. Some people make decisions primarily based on logical criteria, while others prioritize emotional and relationship factors. Understanding someone's decision-making pattern allows you to present information in ways that match their decision-making process. Time your requests appropriately and avoid approaches that trigger their decision-making resistance. You can predict how long they'll need to reach conclusions, what information they'll require, and what factors will be most influential in their final choice. The fourth category is communication pattern recognition. Everyone has preferred ways of processing and sharing information that reflect their cognitive style and social preferences. Some people are visual processors who understand information best when it's presented as images, diagrams, or spatial relationships. Others are auditory processors who prefer verbal explanations, discussions, and hearing information spoken aloud. Still others are kinesthetic processors who need hands-on experience, physical movement, or tactile engagement to fully understand concepts. Recognizing someone's communication patterns allows you to translate your message into their preferred processing style, dramatically increasing comprehension and retention. You can also predict how they'll prefer to share information with others and what communication formats will feel most natural and comfortable to them. The fifth category is relationship pattern recognition. People have consistent ways of relating to others that reflect their attachment styles, social needs, and interpersonal strategies. Some people are naturally collaborative and seek consensus before taking action. Others are naturally competitive and prefer individual achievement over group success. Some people are highly social and gain energy from interaction, while others are more solitary and prefer minimal social engagement. Understanding relationship patterns allows you to predict how someone will behave in team situations, what kind of leadership style they'll respond to best, what interpersonal conflicts they're most likely to experience, and what relationship dynamics will either energize or drain them. The most advanced level of pattern recognition is identifying meta patterns that operate across multiple behavioral categories simultaneously. For example, someone might have a consistent pattern of being highly analytical in their decision-making, preferring written communication over verbal communication, working best independently rather than in groups, and becoming more controlling when under stress. These interconnected patterns create a comprehensive behavioral profile that allows extremely accurate prediction of behavior across diverse situations. Developing pattern recognition requires systematic observation over time, combined with understanding of psychological principles. You must train yourself to notice behavioral consistency, rather than being distracted by superficial variations in how patterns are expressed. The same underlying pattern might look different in different contexts, but the core psychological dynamics remain consistent. The key to ethical pattern recognition is using this knowledge to create mutual benefit rather than one-sided advantage. When you understand someone's behavioral patterns, you can interact with them in ways that feel natural and comfortable, and create opportunities that align with their motivations. This makes relationships more effective and satisfying for both parties, rather than giving you exploitative power over others. Pattern recognition also requires understanding your own behavioral patterns and how they interact with others' patterns. Some pattern combinations create natural synergy and collaboration, while others create predictable conflict or misunderstanding. By understanding these pattern interactions, you can adjust your approach to work harmoniously with different types of people, rather than trying to force everyone to adapt to your preferred style. The ultimate goal of behavioral pattern recognition is developing what could be called social intuition that operates automatically and unconsciously. Instead of having to consciously analyze every interaction, you develop an instinctive sense of how different people operate, what they need from interactions, and how to position yourself for mutual success. This social intuition allows you to navigate complex interpersonal situations with ease and grace while creating positive outcomes for everyone involved. Chapter 12. Psychological Triggers and Automated Response Systems. The human mind operates according to automated response systems that can be activated by specific psychological triggers. These systems evolved to help humans make rapid decisions in dangerous or complex situations. But in the modern world, they can be strategically activated to influence behavior, accelerate decision-making, and create predictable responses to specific stimuli. Understanding these automated systems gives you the ability to design interactions that work with human psychology rather than against it. The first automated response system is what psychologists call the commitment and consistency system. When people take a position, make a promise, or identify with a particular viewpoint, their brain automatically seeks to maintain consistency with that position. This happens because psychological inconsistency creates cognitive dissonance, which the brain experiences as stress and seeks to resolve by changing either beliefs or behaviors to restore consistency. The commitment and consistency system can be triggered by getting people to make small, initial commitments that align with larger objectives you want them to pursue. When someone agrees to a small request, helps with a minor task, or states support for a general principle, their brain creates psychological momentum toward maintaining consistency with that initial commitment. Later requests that are consistent with the initial commitment become much easier to accept because refusing would create uncomfortable cognitive dissonance. The key to ethical use of this system is ensuring that the commitments you encourage people to make genuinely serve their interests as well as your own. When consistency leads people toward outcomes that benefit them, the system becomes a tool for mutual success rather than manipulation. The second automated system is the social proof and conformity system. Humans are biologically programmed to look to others for guidance about appropriate behavior, especially in uncertain or ambiguous situations. When people see others engaging in particular behaviors, their brain interprets this as evidence that the behavior is correct, safe, and socially acceptable. This system can be triggered by providing examples of similar people who have already taken the action you want someone to consider. The more similar the examples are to your target person in terms of demographics, situation, or values, the more powerful the social proof becomes. The brain essentially shortcuts the decision-making process by concluding that if people like them are doing something, it must be the right choice. The social proof system is particularly powerful when combined with specificity and credibility. Instead of saying, "Lots of people do this," you provide specific examples with concrete details that make the social proof feel real and relevant. You might mention the exact number of people, their specific circumstances, or the particular results they achieved. The third automated system is the authority and expertise system. Throughout human history, following the guidance of knowledgeable authority figures usually improved survival odds. So the brain developed automatic deference responses to perceived expertise and authority. When someone is identified as an expert or authority in a relevant domain, their recommendations carry disproportionate weight compared to the same recommendations coming from non-experts. This system can be triggered by establishing credibility and expertise before making requests or recommendations. You might mention relevant credentials, share examples of past success, demonstrate deep knowledge of the subject matter, or have your expertise validated by other recognized authorities. The key is that the expertise must be genuinely relevant to the situation where you're seeking influence. The authority system is also triggered by confidence and certainty in communication. When you speak with appropriate confidence about subjects where you have genuine expertise, you activate automatic deference responses that make others more likely to accept your guidance and recommendations. The fourth automated system is the reciprocity and obligation system. Humans have a deep psychological need to balance social exchanges and return favors, gifts, or assistance they've received. When someone provides value, help, or resources, the recipient automatically calculates a psychological debt that they feel motivated to repay. This system can be triggered by providing genuine value before making requests. The value doesn't have to be large or expensive, but it must be meaningful to the recipient and clearly provided without immediate expectation of return. When you help someone solve a problem, share useful information, or make their life easier in some way, you create psychological credit that can later be applied toward requests for cooperation or assistance. The reciprocity system is most powerful when the initial value is unexpected, personally relevant, and genuinely helpful. Random acts of kindness or assistance often create more psychological obligation than formal exchanges, where reciprocity is explicitly expected. The fifth automated system is the scarcity and loss aversion system. The human brain is wired to place higher value on things that are rare, limited, or in danger of becoming unavailable. This happens because throughout human evolution, scarce resources were often critical for survival, and missing opportunities to acquire scarce resources could be catastrophic. This system can be triggered by creating genuine scarcity around opportunities, resources, or access. The scarcity must be real rather than artificial, and it must be relevant to something the person actually values. When you can honestly communicate that an opportunity is limited in time, availability, or access. The scarcity system is also triggered by highlighting potential losses rather than just potential gains. People are more motivated to avoid losing something they already have than to gain something new of equivalent value. This means that framing requests in terms of what someone might lose by not acting can be more motivating than framing the same request in terms of what they might gain by acting. The sixth automated system is the liking and similarity system. People are more easily influenced by individuals they like, trust, and feel connected to. This system can be triggered by finding genuine commonalities, shared experiences, or similar perspectives that create natural affinity between people. The liking system is activated through several mechanisms, including similarity in background, interests, or values, physical attractiveness and grooming that signals health and competence, and association with positive experiences or emotions. When people feel natural affinity toward you, their psychological resistance to your ideas and requests decreases automatically. The most ethical and sustainable approach to triggering automated response systems is what could be called aligned activation. This means only triggering systems in directions that genuinely serve the other person's interests and values. When you use psychological triggers to help people make decisions that are good for them, you're working with their psychology to overcome inertia, fear, and uncertainty that might prevent them from taking beneficial action. When psychological triggers are used to manipulate people into decisions that harm their interests, they create resentment, regret, and resistance that damages relationships and makes future influence more difficult. The most effective long-term approach is building influence through genuine value creation, authentic relationship building, and mutual benefit rather than through psychological manipulation. Chapter 13. Building psychological resilience and mental fortitude. Most people approach psychological resilience as something you either have or don't have, a fixed characteristic that determines how well you handle stress, adversity, and challenge. This belief leaves them vulnerable to being overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control and unable to maintain peak performance during difficult periods. But psychological resilience is actually a set of learnable skills that can be systematically developed to create unshakable mental fortitude, regardless of external circumstances. The foundation of psychological resilience is what neuroscientists call cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to shift between different mental frameworks and adapt your thinking to match changing situations. Most people get psychologically stuck because they become rigidly attached to particular interpretations of events, specific outcomes they're trying to achieve, or fixed ideas about how things should work. Cognitive flexibility allows you to maintain multiple perspectives simultaneously. Switch between different problem-solving approaches as circumstances change, and find opportunity within apparent setbacks. This flexibility prevents you from becoming psychologically trapped when reality doesn't match your expectations or preferences. The first skill for developing cognitive flexibility is perspective scaling. This means deliberately shifting between different time horizons and levels of analysis when evaluating challenges or setbacks. When something goes wrong, most people become trapped in immediate emotional reactions and lose perspective on the larger context of their lives and goals. Perspective scaling involves systematically asking yourself how the current situation will matter in 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, and 5 years. You also ask how this situation fits into the broader context of your life goals, your personal growth, and your overall life experience. This process usually reveals that most daily stressors and setbacks are much less significant than they feel in the immediate moment. The second skill is interpretation flexibility. Every situation can be interpreted in multiple ways, and the interpretation you choose determines your emotional response and behavioral options. Resilient people automatically generate multiple interpretations for challenging situations and deliberately choose the interpretations that maintain their psychological resourcefulness. For example, when faced with rejection, you could interpret it as evidence that you're inadequate, as information about poor fit between you and the opportunity, or as redirection toward better opportunities that you haven't discovered yet. Each interpretation creates completely different emotional and behavioral responses, even though the objective facts remain the same. The third skill is emotional regulation mastery. Instead of being controlled by whatever emotions arise from circumstances, you develop the ability to consciously generate emotional states that serve your goals and maintain your effectiveness. This doesn't mean suppressing or ignoring emotions, but rather understanding that emotional states are tools that can be strategically deployed. Emotional regulation involves recognizing emotional states early, before they overwhelm your rational thinking, understanding what specific emotions are trying to communicate about your situation, and consciously shifting toward emotional states that enhance your decision-making and performance capabilities. The fourth foundation of resilience is identity independence. Most people derive their sense of self-worth and identity from external circumstances, including their job performance, other people's opinions, their financial status, or their social relationships. This makes their psychological well-being dependent on factors beyond their direct control and vulnerable to circumstances that inevitably fluctuate. Identity independence means developing a core sense of self that remains stable regardless of external circumstances. This identity is based on your values, your character, your commitment to growth, and your intrinsic worth as a human being, rather than on temporary external achievements or conditions. When your identity is independent of circumstances, setbacks become information and learning opportunities rather than threats to your fundamental sense of worth. Success becomes satisfying, but not necessary for psychological well-being. Other people's opinions become interesting data, but not determinants of your self-perception. The fifth foundation is control focus mastery. Resilient people automatically distinguish between factors within their control and factors outside their control, then focus their attention and energy exclusively on factors they can actually influence. This prevents the psychological drain that comes from worrying about or trying to change things that are fundamentally beyond their power to control. Control focus involves identifying your sphere of influence in any situation, accepting factors outside that sphere without psychological resistance, and channeling all your mental and emotional resources toward areas where your actions can actually make a difference. This focus creates a sense of personal agency and effectiveness even in challenging circumstances. The sixth foundation is meaning-making capability. Humans are meaning-making creatures who must find purpose and significance in their experiences to maintain psychological well-being. Resilient people are skilled at finding constructive meaning in even difficult or painful experiences, rather than allowing those experiences to feel random, pointless, or purely negative. This doesn't mean pretending that bad things are good or that painful experiences are pleasant. It means finding ways that challenges contribute to your growth, strength, wisdom, or character development. It means seeing setbacks as preparation for future opportunities, or as redirection toward better paths than you were previously pursuing. The seventh foundation is support network activation. No one maintains resilience in complete isolation. Psychological fortitude requires knowing when to seek help, having access to people who can provide different types of support, and being skilled at utilizing social resources. Effective support networks include people who can provide practical assistance, emotional understanding, objective perspective, and accountability. Resilient people consciously cultivate these relationships during good times, so they're available during challenging periods, and they're equally ready to provide support to others when circumstances are reversed. The final foundation of resilience is adaptation acceleration. Instead of being overwhelmed by change or trying to resist circumstances beyond their control, resilient people become skilled at rapidly adapting to new realities and finding ways to thrive within whatever conditions they face. Adaptation acceleration involves quickly assessing new situations to identify opportunities and threats, rapidly acquiring new skills or knowledge required by changing circumstances, and maintaining psychological flexibility to adjust strategies and approaches as needed. This creates confidence that you can handle whatever changes or challenges arise because you've developed reliable processes for adaptation and growth. Building psychological resilience is not about becoming emotionless or avoiding all stress and challenge. It's about developing the mental skills and emotional capabilities that allow you to maintain your effectiveness, decision-making ability, and psychological well-being, regardless of external circumstances. This resilience becomes a competitive advantage that allows you to perform at your best when others are overwhelmed and to see opportunities that others miss during difficult periods. Chapter 14. Long-term behavioral change and habit psychology. Most people approach behavioral change through willpower and motivation, trying to force themselves to act differently through conscious effort and determination. This approach fails over 90% of the time because it fights against the psychological systems that actually control behavior rather than working with them. Understanding habit psychology allows you to create lasting behavioral change by aligning your conscious goals with your unconscious behavioral programming. The human brain is designed to automate frequently repeated behaviors to conserve mental energy for novel or complex situations. These automated behaviors become habits that operate below conscious awareness and require little to no willpower to maintain. The key to lasting behavioral change is not fighting against your brain's automation systems, but rather programming them with the behaviors you want to become automatic. Every habit operates according to what neuroscientists call the habit loop, which consists of a cue that triggers the behavior, a routine that is the behavior itself, and a reward that reinforces the neural pathway. Most people focus exclusively on trying to change the routine, but lasting change requires understanding and modifying all three components of the habit loop. The first step in habit modification is cue identification and design. Habits are triggered by specific environmental, emotional, or social cues that signal to your brain that it's time to engage in the automated behavior. These cues can be external factors like specific locations, times of day, or social situations. Or they can be internal factors like emotional states, thoughts, or physical sensations. To change existing habits, you must identify the specific cues that trigger unwanted behaviors. Then either eliminate those cues from your environment or create new behavioral routines that respond to the same cues. To create new habits, you must design clear, consistent cues that will trigger the behaviors you want to develop. The most effective cues are specific, consistent, and tied to existing routines or environmental factors that already occur regularly in your life. For example, if you want to develop a meditation habit, you might cue it to occur immediately after your morning coffee or right before you brush your teeth at night. The second step is routine optimization and progression. The behaviors you're trying to establish must be designed for consistency rather than intensity, especially in the early stages of habit formation. Most people try to implement dramatic changes that require high levels of motivation and willpower, which are not sustainable over time. Effective habit routines start extremely small and gradually increase in complexity or intensity as the behavior becomes more automated. For example, if you want to develop an exercise habit, you might start with a commitment to put on workout clothes every day, rather than committing to an hour-long workout routine. Once putting on workout clothes becomes automatic, you can add walking around the block, then gradually build toward more intensive exercise routines. The key principle is that consistency is more important than intensity during habit formation. It's better to do a small version of the behavior every day than to do an intensive version inconsistently. The third step is reward system optimization. Habits are reinforced by rewards that create positive associations with the behavior and strengthen the neural pathways that make the behavior more automatic over time. These rewards can be intrinsic satisfaction from the behavior itself or external rewards that you consciously attach to the behavior. The most sustainable habit rewards are intrinsic rewards that come from the behavior itself. For example, the reward for regular exercise might be increased energy, improved mood, or the satisfaction of becoming someone who prioritizes their health. External rewards can be useful for establishing habits initially, but they should be gradually replaced with intrinsic rewards to create habits that are self-sustaining rather than dependent on ongoing external motivation. The fourth step is identity alignment and reinforcement. The most powerful driver of long-term behavioral change is identity change rather than behavior change. When you shift your identity to align with the behaviors you want to maintain, those behaviors become expressions of who you are rather than things you force yourself to do. Identity-based habit change involves consciously adopting the identity of someone who naturally engages in the behaviors you want to develop. Instead of saying, "I want to exercise more," you say, "I am someone who prioritizes physical fitness." Instead of "I want to read more," you say, "I am someone who values learning and personal growth." Every time you engage in the desired behavior, you reinforce this identity by providing evidence that you are indeed the type of person who does these things. Over time, the identity becomes self-reinforcing as you naturally act in ways that are consistent with how you see yourself. The fifth step is environment design and systems thinking. Your environment has enormous influence over your behavior, often much more influence than your conscious intentions or willpower. Designing your environment to support desired behaviors and discourage unwanted behaviors is one of the most effective strategies for lasting change. Environment design might involve rearranging your physical space to make good behaviors easier and bad behaviors more difficult, or creating information environments that support your desired identity and goals. The key insight is that you don't just respond to your environment. You can consciously design your environment to shape your behavior in desired directions. This removes much of the willpower requirement from behavioral change because your environment naturally guides you toward the behaviors you want to develop. The sixth step is implementation, intention, and failure recovery. Even well-designed habit systems will occasionally be disrupted by unexpected circumstances, high stress, travel, illness, or other factors beyond your control. The difference between people who maintain long-term behavioral change and those who give up is having predetermined strategies for getting back on track quickly when disruptions occur. Implementation intentions involve planning specific responses to likely obstacles or disruptions. You decide in advance what you'll do if you miss a day of your habit routine, how you'll maintain modified versions of your habits during travel or busy periods, and how you'll recover motivation when enthusiasm decreases. The final aspect of habit psychology is understanding that behavioral change is not a linear process, but rather a series of cycles that involve periods of rapid progress, plateaus, temporary setbacks, and renewed growth. Expecting this cyclical pattern prevents discouragement during inevitable challenging periods and helps maintain long-term perspective on the change process. Lasting behavioral change requires patience, consistency, and strategic thinking rather than intense effort and dramatic transformation attempts. When you work with your brain's natural learning and automation systems, rather than fighting against them, behavioral change becomes much more sustainable and satisfying. Chapter 15. The Complete Psychological Mastery Framework. You now possess a comprehensive understanding of human psychology that gives you enormous advantages in every area of life where human behavior matters. But knowledge without application remains merely interesting information rather than practical power. This final chapter integrates everything you've learned into a complete framework for applying psychological mastery in real-world situations to achieve your most important goals. The foundation of psychological mastery is what could be called strategic awareness, which means operating from conscious understanding of the psychological dynamics occurring in every human interaction, rather than simply reacting to surface-level behaviors and communications. Most people navigate social and professional situations based on intuition, emotion, and cultural conditioning. Strategic awareness involves automatically asking yourself several key questions during important interactions. What psychological state is the other person in right now? And how does that affect their decision-making capability and receptiveness to influence? What unconscious needs, fears, or motivations are driving their behavior beneath what they're explicitly communicating? What behavioral patterns are they demonstrating that predict how they'll respond to different approaches? You also maintain awareness of your own psychological state and how it's affecting your thinking, emotional responses, and behavioral choices. You consciously manage your emotional state to maintain resourcefulness and clarity, rather than being reactive to whatever emotions arise from circumstances. You recognize when your own cognitive biases, defensive reactions, or ego needs are interfering with your ability to respond strategically to situations. The second level of the framework is interaction design, which means consciously structuring conversations, meetings, and social encounters to create optimal conditions for achieving your objectives. Instead of hoping that interactions will naturally lead to positive outcomes, you take responsibility for guiding interactions in directions that serve everyone's interests. Interaction design begins before the interaction starts, with understanding what you want to accomplish, what the other person's likely priorities and concerns are, and what approach is most likely to create mutual satisfaction with the outcome. You consider the optimal environment, timing, and emotional tone for the conversation you want to have. During the interaction, you monitor psychological dynamics and adjust your approach based on real-time feedback about how your communication is being received. You notice when someone becomes defensive, disengaged, or resistant, and you shift your approach to re-establish psychological safety and openness. You pay attention to what creates energy and enthusiasm in the other person and lean into those areas rather than pushing through resistance. The third level is influence orchestration, which means systematically applying the principles of persuasion and behavioral psychology to create outcomes that serve your goals while providing genuine value to others. This is not manipulation because it's based on creating mutual benefit rather than one-sided advantage. Influence orchestration involves understanding what someone's primary motivations and psychological drivers are, then framing your requests and proposals in ways that align with those drivers. You provide value before asking for anything in return. Build trust through consistency and competence, and create social proof that supports the actions you're encouraging. You also understand timing and know when someone is psychologically ready to make decisions versus when they need more time, information, or emotional processing. You don't push when resistance indicates that someone isn't ready, but you also don't hesitate to ask for commitment when all the psychological conditions for agreement are present. The fourth level is relationship architecture, which means consciously building and maintaining relationships that provide mutual value over extended periods of time. Instead of focusing only on immediate transactions or interactions, you think strategically about how to create relationships that become more valuable for both parties over time. Relationship architecture involves understanding what different people need from relationships and consistently providing those things in sustainable ways. Some people need intellectual stimulation and challenging conversations. Others need emotional support and empathetic listening. Still, others need practical assistance and problem-solving collaboration. You also manage relationship dynamics to prevent common sources of conflict, resentment, or misunderstanding. You maintain appropriate boundaries while being generous with value. You communicate clearly about expectations and responsibilities while remaining flexible about how those are fulfilled. The fifth level is systematic influence, which means creating systems and processes that multiply your influence beyond what you can accomplish through individual interactions. This involves building reputation and credibility that creates influence even with people you've never met directly. Systematic influence might involve creating content that demonstrates your expertise and valuable perspective, building networks of relationships where people refer others to you, or developing systems that consistently deliver value to many people simultaneously. The sixth level is psychological leadership, which means inspiring others to voluntarily follow your guidance because they trust your judgment and believe that following your lead serves their interests. This is the highest form of influence because it doesn't require persuasion, manipulation, or ongoing effort to maintain. Psychological leadership is built through consistently demonstrating competence in areas that matter to others, making decisions that benefit the group rather than just yourself, and maintaining integrity between your stated values and your actual behavior. People follow psychological leaders because they want to, not because they have to. The final level is legacy creation, which means using your psychological mastery to contribute to outcomes that are larger and more important than your immediate personal interests. This involves applying your understanding of human behavior to solve significant problems, create value for many people. Legacy creation represents the most fulfilling application of psychological mastery because it aligns your influence capabilities with meaningful purposes that create lasting impact. When you use your understanding of human psychology to help others achieve their goals, solve important problems, or create positive change in the world, you experience the deep satisfaction that comes from using your capabilities in service of something larger than yourself. The complete psychological mastery framework transforms you from someone who is subject to human behavioral dynamics into someone who consciously works with those dynamics to create positive outcomes for yourself and others. You move from being reactive to being strategic, from being influenced to being influential, and from being confused by human behavior to being someone who understands and guides it. This mastery gives you confidence in social and professional situations because you understand what's happening beneath the surface of interactions. It gives you influence because you know how to communicate and behave in ways that naturally encourage others to be receptive to your ideas and requests. It gives you the ability to build meaningful relationships because you understand what different people need and how to provide value in ways that feel authentic and satisfying. Most importantly, psychological mastery gives you the freedom to choose your responses to any situation, rather than being controlled by unconscious reactions, defensive patterns, or social conditioning. You become the conscious architect of your own behavior and relationships, rather than being subject to whatever psychological forces happen to be operating in your environment. This freedom and capability represent the ultimate goal of understanding human psychology. Not just to achieve better outcomes in the external world, but to become the person you're capable of being when you're no longer limited by unconscious psychological patterns that don't serve your highest interests and values.